The parade ground falls silent. Families rush forward, tapping out their soldiers with tears and laughter. But Airman Kang Minute Ho, 30, stands frozen. Alone. His name echoes. Once. Twice. No one comes. Whispers ripple through the crowd. He closes his eyes, bracing for the shame. Then, tap. 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 Heels on concrete. A woman cuts through the families. She reaches him. Her hand touches his shoulder. My son. The crowd erupts. But what no one knew was that this reunion had been 30 years in the making. Welcome to Life in Stories, where we bring you deeply emotional tales that touch the heart. If this is your first time here, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. And tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from today? The rain didn't stop on Sundays. Young Minute Ho learned this early. Every Sunday, water streaked down the orphanage windows like tears. The building cried for all the children inside. He sat on the wooden bench near the entrance, legs swinging above the floor, too short to reach the ground. Other children played in the common room, laughing, fighting over toys. But Minute Ho stayed by the window, waiting. The door opened throughout the day. Prospective parents, relatives, grandparents who'd finally gotten custody. Each time, a child's name was called. Each time, someone left toward a future he could only imagine. Minute Ho. Never. Every Sunday, he waited. Every Sunday, the door stayed closed. By the time he turned 8, he stopped sitting by the window. But he never stopped listening for his name. The memory came in fragments, like broken glass he'd spent years trying to piece together. His mother's face. Young. Exhausted. Beautiful in a way that poverty couldn't completely erase. She held him in a small apartment that smelled of mold and yesterday's rice. Bills covered the table, red stamps screaming final notice. The electricity had been cut twice that month. His father had left 3 weeks earlier. No note. No money. Just absence. She rocked Minute Ho slowly, her tears falling into his hair. He was too young to understand, but old enough to feel her shaking. I'm sorry, she whispered into the silence. I'm sorry. I can't give you the life you deserve. The orphanage director had kind eyes. His mother filled out paperwork with trembling hands, checking a box that said temporary placement. But temporary became permanent. She visited once. Twice. Then the visit stopped. Minute Ho waited anyway. Birthdays were the worst. The orphanage tried. There was always cake, cheap, too sweet, shared among whatever children had birthdays that month. The staff sang, clapped, smiled with practiced warmth. But afterward, some children received packages, letters, phone calls from relatives who couldn't take them in but hadn't forgotten them. Minute Ho received silence. He learned to slip away during these moments, to the bathroom or the small courtyard out back. He learned that if you cried quietly enough, no one noticed. The other children noticed other things, though. Minute Ho has no one, Kim Sung-tae announced one day, loud enough for everyone to hear. Not even grandparents. My grandmother says that means your whole family abandoned you. Minute Ho said nothing. He'd learned that responses only fed the cruelty. Maybe they're dead, another child offered. Maybe they just didn't want him, Sung-tae corrected. That night, Minute Ho stared at the ceiling above his bunk. Around him, 11 other boys slept. But he'd never felt more alone. The teachers noticed him, though not always kindly. Minute Ho is quiet, they wrote in reports. Struggles to connect with peers. Seems emotionally distant. But Ms. Park, who taught mathematics, saw something else. She noticed how he completed every assignment. How his desk stayed organized when others descended into chaos. How he followed instructions precisely, as if discipline could fill the void that love had left. You're a hard worker, she told him once, after he'd scored perfectly on an exam. He nodded. What else could he do? Hard work didn't abandon you. Rules didn't leave in the night. Consistency became his religion. By 15, he was the oldest boy in the orphanage. The younger children looked to him, though he never sought the role. He helped with homework, broke up fights, maintained order, building the family he'd never had, in the only way he knew how. The military recruiter arrived on a Tuesday in October. Lieutenant Choi stood at the front of the classroom in a crisp uniform, medals catching the fluorescent light. He spoke about honor, duty, brotherhood. The military doesn't care where you came from, he said. It cares where you're going. It cares who you become. He showed videos. Soldiers standing shoulder to shoulder, moving as one unit. Precision, purpose, belonging. Something in Minute Ho's chest cracked open. That night, he lay awake again, but for a different reason. For the first time in years, he felt something other than numbness. Hope. If I can't have a family, he whispered to the darkness, I'll build one. 2 years later, on his 17th birthday, he signed the papers. The morning he left, the orphanage felt smaller than he remembered. Ms. Park helped him pack his single bag. 2 shirts, 3 pairs of socks, a photograph of the orphanage children, the closest thing to a family photo he'd ever had. The director met him at the door. Mr. Han had aged considerably, grey overwhelming the black in his hair. Be strong, Minute Ho, he said, placing a hand on the young man's shoulder. Minute Ho nodded. Strong was all he knew how to be. No one else came to say goodbye. The other children were at breakfast, absorbed in their own survival. He walked down the steps he'd climbed 1,000 times, past the window where he'd waited every Sunday, through the gate that had been both prison and sanctuary. He didn't look back. But halfway down the street, his vision blurred. His throat tightened. A single tear fell. He wiped it away quickly, angry at the weakness. Angry at the little boy inside him who still waited by the window. The military would fix this. Brotherhood would fill the emptiness. He believed this with desperate certainty. He had to. The rain fell in relentless sheets during dawn drills. Recruits slipped in the thick mud, gasping for air that felt like fire. Instructors screamed, their voices cutting through the storm like knives. One by one, soldiers collapsed from sheer exhaustion. But Airman Kang Minute Ho kept running. His legs burned with lactic acid, his lungs screamed for mercy, but he never stopped. He had learned early, pain was temporary, but quitting was forever. In this brutal crucible, he forged himself anew. In training camp, he quietly became a legend. While others complained about the cold or the food, he worked. While others slept, he studied technical manuals under dim bunk lights. His bunk was always immaculate, his gear perfectly arranged for instant inspection. Instructors noted his precision. Peers noted his silence. He never shared stories of home, because he had none to tell. He never asked for favors, because he expected none to be given. He relied only on himself. Slowly, a formidable reputation formed. He was the hardest worker, the most reliable soldier, the quiet leader who led by example. When a recruit struggled with a complex knot, Minute Ho would demonstrate without a word. When a team faltered under pressure, he would step in and steady them with his calm presence. They began to call him the Machine. It wasn't meant as an insult, but as awe. Machines didn't break. Machines didn't need rest. Machines didn't feel pain or loneliness. But Minute Ho felt everything. He felt the isolation keenly, especially on mail call. Every Wednesday, the squad gathered as the sergeant distributed letters and care packages. Laughter erupted over shared snacks from home. Tears fell over news of births and weddings. Minute Ho stood apart, waiting for his name. It never came. One night, after lights out, he walked to the empty mailbox behind the barracks. He opened it, knowing it was futile. Empty. Again. The cold metal bit into his fingers. He closed it softly, the sound echoing in the silent yard like a gunshot. Senior Officer Park noticed him. Not for his silence, but for his unwavering dedication. One evening, after a grueling exercise, Officer Park approached. "Doesn't anyone visit you, Airman?" he asked, his voice gentle. Minute Ho stood at attention. "No, sir." The officer nodded, no pity in his eyes, only deep respect. From then on, Officer Park became a mentor. He taught Minute Ho not just tactics, but wisdom. Strength isn't about never falling, he said. It's about rising every time you do. For the first time, Minute Ho felt seen. Not as a machine, but as a man. His true test came during a routine maintenance check on a C-130 aircraft. A sudden hydraulic failure threatened a catastrophic crash during a training flight. Alarms blared loudly. Panic spread among the ground crew. But Minute Ho remained calm. His hands, steady and precise, diagnosed the issue instantly. He bypassed the failed system, rerouting pressure manually with skill. The aircraft landed safely, saving 12 lives. No one knew how close they had come to disaster until after the debrief. The commendation ceremony was formal and stiff. The base commander pinned a medal on his chest. Applause filled the hall. His squad cheered, proud of their quiet leader. Minute Ho accepted the honor with a slight bow, his face unreadable. But later, in the empty barracks, he sat on his bunk, holding the medal. The metal was cold. The silence was heavy. He traced the engraving with his thumb, wondering if this was enough. If recognition could fill the void where family should be. It didn't. Years passed in a blur of duty and discipline. Minute Ho rose through the ranks, his reputation solidifying like stone. He was the soldier who never complained, who never asked for more, who always gave everything. He became a pillar of his unit, a silent guardian watching over his brothers. He taught new recruits, shared his rations, and stood watch when others were sick. He built a family from the fragments of duty, binding them with loyalty and shared sacrifice. Then, one ordinary afternoon, his commander called him into the office. "Airman Kang," the commander said, looking at his file. "Your service contract ends next month." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Minute Ho stood motionless. Next month. 30 days until the only family he had ever known dissolved. 30 days until he was alone again. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken fear. His military family was ending. Again. He nodded, turned, and walked out, the weight of 30 years of loneliness settling back onto his shoulders. Minute Ho woke before dawn on his final day of service. The barracks were silent, his fellow airmen still lost in sleep. He sat on the edge of his bunk, staring at the uniform laid out with military precision. This would be the last time he wore it. The last time he belonged to something larger than himself. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the iron, heating it in the dim light of early morning. He ironed each crease with meticulous care, running his fingers along the fabric to ensure perfection. The boots came next, polished until they reflected the fluorescent lights like black mirrors. He'd polished them 3 times already, but his hands needed something to do. Something to distract from the gnawing emptiness in his chest. In the mirror, he practiced standing straight, shoulders back, chin up. The posture of pride. The mask of strength he'd worn for 13 years. The ceremony grounds buzzed with anticipation. Families had arrived hours early, claiming the best viewing spots. Balloons danced in the morning breeze, red, blue, yellow. Mothers clutched flowers, their eyes scanning the formation for their sons and daughters. Fathers stood with cameras ready, practicing angles. Children ran between the chairs, their laughter cutting through the military formality like birds through morning mist. Minute Ho arrived alone, as always. He walked past the clusters of excited families, past the embraces and the tears of anticipation. A few people glanced at him, then quickly looked away, searching for their own soldiers. He smiled politely when eyes met his, a practiced expression that revealed nothing. But inside, the emptiness expanded, a void so familiar it felt like home. He took his place in formation, surrounded by brothers who would soon become strangers. Near the front row, a young airman, barely 20, spotted his family and his face transformed. The moment the practice formation broke, he sprinted toward them. His mother opened her arms wide, and he collapsed into her embrace like a child. They cried together, her hands in his hair, his face buried in her shoulder. Father joined them, wrapping both in his arms. A complete circle. Minute Ho looked away. His throat tightened. He focused on the distant flagpole, counting the seconds until the ceremony began. The base commander took the podium, His voice amplified across the parade ground. He spoke of sacrifice, of young men and women who had given years to their country. He spoke of honor, duty, patriotism. The crowd erupted in applause after each pause, waves of appreciation washing over the formation. Minute stood perfectly still, his face neutral, his heart heavy with the weight of words that felt hollow without someone to share them with. Then came the explanation of the tradition. The tapping out ceremony, the commander explained, was sacred. Families would approach their soldiers and physically tap them on the shoulder, symbolically releasing them from military service back into civilian life. It represented the transfer from one family, the military, to another, their own. The first person to tap becomes part of that soldier's story forever. But, the commander added solemnly, if no one comes forward, the soldier must stand and wait. Minute-Ho's jaw tightened. He knew this part. He'd known it for weeks. The names began. One by one, soldiers stepped forward. One by one, families rushed to claim them. Tears. Laughter. Cameras flashing. Each reunion was a small miracle, a story of waiting finally rewarded. The crowd cheered for each soldier, sharing in their joy. Minute-Ho watched from his position, his hands clasped behind his back, breathing slowly through his nose. Then his name cut through the celebration. Airman Kang Minute-Ho. He stepped forward, his boots striking the pavement with practiced precision. The formation opened behind him. He walked to the designated spot and stopped, standing at attention. Eyes forward. Shoulders back. The posture of strength. The crowd fell silent. Waiting. Watching. Seconds stretched into eternity. Minute-Ho could hear his own heartbeat, could feel hundreds of eyes on him. Families looked around, confused. Whispers began to ripple through the audience like wind through grass. Where is his family? Does he have anyone? Poor man, standing there alone. Minute-Ho's vision blurred slightly. He blinked hard, forcing the moisture back. Not here. Not now. He would not break in front of these people. He had survived 13 years of loneliness. He could survive 13 more minutes. His fingers curled into fists behind his back, nails digging into palms. The officer beside him shifted uncomfortably, glancing at his clipboard. Protocol dictated they wait a reasonable time, but this silence was becoming unbearable. The officer opened his mouth to speak, to move on to the next name, to end Minute-Ho's humiliation. Then, a sound. Sharp. Clear. Deliberate. Tap. 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 Heels on concrete, cutting through the silence like a blade. Every head turned. Cameras swiveled. The crowd parted instinctively, creating a path. A woman walked forward with absolute authority, her tailored suit immaculate, her posture regal. She moved as if the entire ceremony existed solely for this moment. Minute-Ho's breath caught. His heart stopped. The woman walked directly toward him. She was elegant in a way that commanded attention without demanding it. Mid-50s, with silver threading through dark hair pulled into a sophisticated bun. Her tailored navy suit spoke of wealth, but her eyes held something money couldn't buy, years of accumulated pain and desperate hope. The crowd recognized her instantly. Whispers exploded like fireworks. That's Lee Ji-won. The billionaire philanthropist. What is she doing here? Minute-Ho's mind raced, trying to make sense of the moment. She must be here for someone else. Perhaps a soldier standing nearby. Perhaps this was a publicity event he hadn't been informed about. His heart hammered against his ribs as she drew closer, her heels marking time like a countdown. But she didn't stop at the soldiers beside him. She walked directly to him. The world narrowed to just the two of them. Everything else, the crowd, the cameras, the whispers, faded into white noise. She stopped inches away, her eyes searching his face with an intensity that made him want to look away. But he couldn't. Something in her gaze held him frozen. Slowly, she raised her hand. Her fingers trembled slightly as they moved through the air between them. Then, gently, she touched his shoulder. The formal tap that would release him from service. But her hand didn't pull away. It remained there, warm and real. The silence was absolute. Then she spoke, her voice breaking on two simple words that would shatter and rebuild his entire world. My son. The crowd gasped collectively. Cameras flashed in a frenzy. But Minute-Ho heard nothing except the rushing of blood in his ears. His son. This woman, this stranger, was claiming him? His mind rejected the impossibility even as his heart recognized something ancient and true in her eyes. I am Lee Ji-won, she said, her voice stronger now, pitched for him alone despite the hundreds listening. But 30 years ago, I was just a desperate mother named Lee Minute-jung. You were 2 years old. Your father had abandoned us 3 months earlier. I had nothing, no money, no food, no hope. The bills were suffocating me. You were hungry, and I couldn't feed you. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't wipe them away. I gave you to the orphanage because I thought it was the only way to save you. I thought they could give you what I couldn't. But the moment I walked away, I knew I'd made the worst mistake of my life. Minute-Ho's breath came in short gasps. His carefully constructed walls were crumbling. I worked 3 jobs, she continued. I saved every one. I went back 6 months later to get you, but you'd been transferred. They wouldn't tell me where. Privacy laws. I searched for 29 years. I hired investigators. I checked every orphanage, every school, every military base. I built my company and used every resource, every connection, every favor I had. She smiled through her tears. I found you 4 months ago. Minute-Ho's eyes widened. 4 months. I've been watching you from a distance, she admitted. I attended your commendation ceremony in disguise. I read every report your commanders filed. I learned about the man you'd become, disciplined, honorable, selfless. I was so proud. But I waited because I wanted to return to you at the most meaningful moment. The day you completed your service. The day you needed family most. Something broke inside Minute-Ho. The iron discipline that had sustained him for 30 years finally shattered. His face crumpled. His shoulders shook. For the first time in his life, the first time he could remember, he cried. Not silent tears in dark corners, but deep, wrenching sobs that tore from his chest like prisoners escaping captivity. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. He collapsed into her embrace, this stranger who wasn't a stranger, this mother he'd never known but had always needed. She held him tightly, one hand cradling his head like he was still her 2-year-old boy. The crowd erupted in thunderous applause. Officers wiped their eyes. Soldiers wept openly. Families clutched each other tighter, recognizing the sacredness of this moment. Cameras captured everything, but no photograph could contain the emotion that saturated the air like oxygen. Against her shoulder, Minute-Ho's voice emerged broken and small. I thought no one wanted me. She pulled back just enough to cup his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. You were never abandoned, Minute-Ho. I never stopped loving you. Not for a single day. Not for a single moment. You were always wanted. Always loved. Always mine. His voice cracked with 30 years of accumulated longing. I waited my whole life to hear that. She smiled, radiant despite the tears. And I spent my whole life trying to say it. They stood together in the center of the parade ground, neither willing to let go. Around them, the ceremony had transformed into something beyond protocol, a testament to love's relentless persistence. Finally, she took his hand. Together, they walked off the parade ground. Not as strangers bound by DNA. Not as soldier and civilian. But as mother and son. As family. The crowd parted for them, applause following their every step. Minute-Ho glanced back once at the formation, at the military family that had sustained him. They saluted him, and he returned it, a final gesture of respect and gratitude. Then he turned forward, toward his future, his mother's hand in his. For 30 years, he believed he had no one. But love had been searching for him all along. Thank you for watching this emotional journey with us. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe for more inspiring tales. Share it with someone who needs hope today. And remember, sometimes the love we're searching for is also searching for us. Until next time.